Hi, guys. Thanks for joining. This is Essence of History. Today we're talking about the first recorded surgery. I'm Amanda Armagast.
And I'm Dr. Abbasi for Essence, and that's very close to my field, Amanda. How did you came across this topic, and tell me a little more about it?
Well, I was actually just thinking, like, what was the first surgery that ever would have been done? Because I thought that the first surgery, my guess would have been like a broken arm or a broken leg that had to be reset. So I thought that that would have been the first surgery. So I just quickly Googled it and I found out that it was trepanation. Am I saying it right?
Trepanation.
Trepanation of the brain. Because then I went to the PA office and I was telling Alyssa, yeah, the first surgery is trepanation, blah blah, and she's like, "Oh, my dad just did that to himself." Apparently her dad like slammed his thumb and it felt like a lot of pressure, so he stuck a needle in it and made a hole in his nail and then blood came out and he felt the pressure relieved. So that's what we do now, I guess. But are you frozen or are you just looking at me funny?
I think we are both frozen.
I think your internet's bad.
Yeah. Now, trepanation meaning opening a hole in the skull. And
So trepanation is specifically the skull. I don't have to say trepanation of the skull.
no, that is the name that we use when we open up the hole, make a hole in the skull. And we have other terms for other things, but I don't necessarily know that we call if you have like something in your nail or somewhere else, if it as well called trepanation or not. But in neurosurgery, when you make a hole in the skull, and we call that trepanation. Now, I'm sure this is not the first surgery performed, but this is the first surgery we have evidence that it was performed successfully, meaning not as a punishment, not as a something that caused patients death, but as well that's something done and routinely, and people survived it.
Well, and there's not just like evidence of bodily evidence or like bones and things. It's actually very well documented too.
Yeah, the documentation comes from studying the mummies.
Oh, I thought that the Egyptians were writing it down like 250,000 years BC.
Um, the Egyptian history is very, very rich.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we do archaeology, we go to Rome and Greece. When the Greece did archaeology, they went to Egypt. So the Egyptian culture is 4,000 years before Greek culture, and certainly there is a lot of hieroglyphs and so on and so forth. But documentation, in the sense that we understand the documentation today, it is not a concept that it's a new concept that we write the history down, we write our findings down, and so on. Certainly, there are some signs on the hieroglyphs and so on about certain procedure which we didn't understand. But about 200 years ago, when we start doing archaeology on Egypt, we noticed that, first of all, there are these mummies. Some of them, they have a hole in the skull that there is a sign that the edge of the bone has been growing. Because you can say when the bone grows, the edges become thicker. And as well, next to the pyramids, there were places where they buried mass graves for people who were just living there. And some of them as well, they noticed that there is a hole in the skull, but they did not die of it, because then we noticed that the edge of the bone is getting thicker and coming together. So these people have survived that trepanation, or making a hole in the skull, for many, many, many years, because those changes happens over many years. So the actual documentation, modern documentation that we know they did that, is 200 years old or 300 years.
What about there's two documents that I'm specifically referring to, and this is just research I did today, so I don't know if it's accurate or not. but the Edwin Smith papyrus. How old
Edwin
is that?
Papyrus.
Yeah, because it says that it's a medical text dating back to 2500 BCE in Egypt that
Yeah.
contains detailed descriptions of various surgical procedures, including treatments for injuries, fractures, and tumors. And
Yeah.
then the father of surgery, the ancient Indian doctor, he says that like apparently he has his own documentation too, and he talks about rhinoplasty and
Mhm.
lithotomy, things like that, like bladder stone removals.
Yeah. Lithotropsy, but that is a different thing. Now, let's stay with the terpenotomy in Old Egypt. Certainly, they did that. We know that. Their documentation is that hieroglyphs and so on is not that what we would, by today's standard, we would call it credible documentation. But credible documentation comes from Egyptologists who literally after Rosetta Stone, that's an old history. Okay, so you have to go way back. So we had no idea what hieroglyphs means. There was no way for us to find out what they mean. We saw them like for last 1,000 years, we saw these things, but that language was lost. That language was lost about 3,000 years ago. Now, and for a long time, the scientists, the archaeologists were trying to find out what do they mean, this hieroglyph. We knew it's a language, but we had no idea what it means until something called the Rosetta Stone was found. And that was during one of the Napoleonic kind of wars that Napoleon goes to Egypt to defy and literally beat British. And he took an archaeologist with him, and that archaeologist, they found a tablet, and in that tablet there were same text in three different languages: Greek and hieroglyphs and another language. And for people who know that, the modern pharaohtic, meaning the modern pharaohs like Cleopatra, they were an Egyptian. They were the descendant from the Greeks when Alexander the Great, about 500 BC, went and captured Egypt, Alexandria. They appointed the Greek dynasty pharaohs there in Egypt. So the Egyptian culture got really tainted with Greek culture. So the Rosetta Stone was still the remnant of the hieroglyphs. So they wrote same text in hieroglyphs, Greek and another language I forgot. And during Napoleonic War, so about 200 years ago, finally, this tablet could say what those hieroglyphs means, and that is how we discovered how to read the hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs are this, which is a pictorial kind of language, like Chinese language, a pictorial language. But the knowledge was found, and then we had the tools to go back and look at all the other documents, including those texts on the walls that they describe this process to let the demon out of people.
That's why they did that trepanation, isn't it?
And what's important is that imagine you are working on the pyramids. Imagine you fall and you hit your head. And then when you hit your head, you may have a bleeding called epidural hematoma, meaning blood under the skull, between the skull and the brain. And that can cause seizure. Then these people start shaking and convulsing. And for those people, they had no idea what it is. They thought they were possessed by devil.
Yep.
Either by chance or by coincidence. Some of them got that if the skull was broken, they took the broken pieces out, so they let the blood out of them. By reducing the pressure, they stopped seizing. So they thought it's the devil. If you make a hole in the skull, you let the devil out. and then they stop having these seizures and coming back being normal again. And then they thought maybe that's what it is. Everybody who has a demon inside of them, we should just make a hole in the skull to let the demon out. And if it was a bleeding cause of the seizure, that might have worked for few people. Obviously, you have to know on what side and where, what the location, and so on. But if it's a huge bleeding, doesn't matter where you put the hole there. The blood comes out, the pressure on the brain is reduced, and people will survive it. And so, and guess what? The Egyptian, they had these tools to do the pyramid work. They had like these tools that they could make a hole, that there was this copper tool. Imagine the whole pyramids were built with copper tools. Can you imagine that?
No.
Not even bronze. You know, copper is very soft metal. But then they had this tool that they would turn like like a little cylinder. They would turn it
Like
and
an
make,
ice, like one of those things when you go ice fishing.
yeah, but not like that. That like much duller, much more primitive than that. But then when you turn it, it makes a hole in the stone.
Hmm.
So imagine now they use the same tool to make a hole in the skull. If it can make a hole in the stone, it can make a hole in the skull, opening up the skull, letting the pressure out, and all of a sudden the person stops seizing, stop convulsing, and stop foaming from the mouth and start talking normal again. So they thought, what a great procedure, and they start performing it for other reason as well, obviously. Um, but for epidural hematoma, it actually works. This is still what we do. If somebody have epidural hematoma, we make a hole in the skull. We make it certainly with better tools and so on. We let the pressure out because this patient can die. They typically have seizure, convulsion, and die.
Imagine what the conversation was. Like someone falls, he's seizing, and then people are like, oh my God, this guy's possessed. But I wonder how they got to the point of let's take this tool and open up part of his skull. Do you have any idea?
Yes, I do. I do. See, many things in the life are coincidence. Imagine at certain point the physician or whoever priest sees that those people who fall, they die. But if they have a piece of bone sticking out, and if you remove that bone, all of a sudden they don't die. Then he makes, maybe I should remove a piece of bone. When they fall and start convulsing, maybe I should just remove a piece of bone. So many things we do, our habits are based on observation, and our action. If the action give us a positive result, we keep doing it, and most likely that was based on that. Now, I'm sure the first possible medical treatment, maybe not surgery, was setting a bone, like broken bone. I'm sure during the very long period of human existence, they have noticed if you immobilize that limb, eventually it grows back and you can walk on it again. But obviously, we don't have much of a documentation in a sense of an actual surgery regarding that. But for the way we described it for the trepanation, we do have actual record. Not only it was done, not only it was done successfully, meaning patient didn't die, but actually this patient survived for years the procedure.
Does that, I know it's a long time between the ancient Egyptians and the founding fathers, but I know George Washington at one point had his blood drained because he was sick. Is that the same thought that was carried over, like the bad spirits to the bad blood, or is it just a total thought but similar concept?
See, I think they go all in the same direction, but there were this humoral idea of medicine. Humor refers to so-called humors or humors.
Yeah, four, right?
Four of them. Do you know what they are?
Yellow bile, or is it
Yeah,
green?
yellow
Is
bile, black bile,
white?
no, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
Mm.
Totally Aristotelian and totally nonsensical. But they thought that harmony gives you good health, disharmony gives you bad health, and for certain things, just based on somebody thought so, some eminent person thought so, that you have just too much blood. Let's just reduce the blood to bring balance in. And the same people who thought washing their hand is beyond them, they thought you just let the blood out. I'm an eminent person, I say so, so it must be that. And say, guess what? The same people, they think they know how to do spine surgery today, and lots of people are damaged in that process. So that concept of I'm an important man, I'm just going to do things, and it should be right because I'm an important man, has been always with us in medicine, and unfortunately, even in 2024, is still the case.
Oh, and it probably always will be. There's always going to be people like that. Would
Yeah.
you know what the ceremonies looked like during
No,
the?
actually, I don't, but I know that you have to hold that person down. I know that part.
But yeah, there's no anesthesia. That was literally my first thought when I saw like, okay, ancient Egyptians, not surprised. Brain, not really surprised. No anesthesia. How? Oh my god,
People need to be much tougher, but most of the people who got their limb amputated in the Civil War,
we're
they didn't
drunk,
have anesthesia.
but they had alcohol.
Yes, they have alcohol, but uh, okay, I give
Isn't
you
that is that not what they did?
alcohol is not anesthesia.
Yeah, but is that not what they did? Wouldn't they like make you take some
Yes,
shots first?
they took some shots, they put them in delirium, and then they cut their limb off, and then they had to be fast because otherwise patient goes to shock and they die of shock itself. So medicine has been not exact science for a long, long time. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, I think that is why we pay the price. Like here, you and I in short time, we do the surgeries that is impossible for other, and we tell them come and learn it. They say no, I'm too important. I don't have time to come and learn new things because medicine is not mathematics. Just
Yeah.
just because you say so, sometimes they think it is so.
Well, it's kind of yeah, not to I know that is very true.
Not to pour salt in the wound,
I'm
right?
not going to pour salt in your wounds, but I was just going to go back to the trepanation. The rituals are very similar actually to surgical practices. Like, of course, you can find whatever you're looking for. So if I'm looking for similarities, I'll find them. But there's like prep that goes involved. It's not just doctor and patient. There's a lot of other people that are involved, shamans, family members, things like that. But there's even aftercare involved.
Hmm.
They don't
And
just
and in medicine, if you come to my OR, most of the thing I do is like a ritual.
yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
because the same process, we hope if it's a good process, give you good results. So probably the rituals, that's the origin of the rituals, a series of things that if you do it that way, give you good result. If you don't do it that way, it gives you bad results, like washing our hands, like sterility, doing one step before the other, and so on. So I wouldn't be surprised about that at all.
But then even with your surgery, there's very specific aftercare. You don't just
Right?
go home. Like you do just go home, but you have guidelines to follow. You can't lift
Exactly.
certain weight, everything like that. With this, there actually were guidelines too to follow. You have like an aftercare guide that you have to do with maybe some herbal remedies, different spiritual practices
You know what
according
Egyptian
yeah.
used a lot? Egyptian used honey a lot.
Mhm.
We had no idea, but just in the last recent years, we understand honey has large antimicrobial properties. Like,
Honey is very powerful.
this is a true story. They found the honey that have been thousands of years old and they still are edible. When I was in my internship in Dartmouth College, we had this patient who had the infection that wasn't going away. So my job as intern was every morning coming and pouring a quart of honey in that big wound. And since then, I have difficulty eating honey, but it worked. It helps us to reduce tremendously the risk of infection.
Honey is because of its antibacterial things. Honey is actually really good for your face too.
So you see, the Egyptian didn't know about the antibacterial, but they knew if you use honey on the wound, patient wouldn't die.
Maybe they did know.
Well, they eventually, I'm sure they did know, but it was a ritual. Even if then they didn't know, even people who didn't know why, they accepted it as a ritual, and that is the origin of any ritual. There is a reason, but then sometimes it's perverted. There is initially there is a reason they do that, but then that reason goes away, but the ritual doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm. It
That
reminds me of a quote I recently heard. I hope I don't butcher it, but science is the how, religion. I think you were with me when I heard this. Science is the how, religion is the why.
correct?
That's one way of looking at things. And same with these rituals. Like it's antibacterial because of the honey, but why are we doing it? Because of our ritual.
Yeah, and they're intertwined. They're definitely intertwined. Okay, I think that is a pretty good short podcast about the history of the first operation. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Amanda?
No, but now I actually want to talk, not here, I want to look it up a little bit, but I want to talk about the history of rhinoplasty.
Okay.
Like, I'm wondering if, so it says, like, what I just read says that it was being done in India in the very, very ancient times. And I'm curious if it was cosmetic or purposeful, like if maybe they were having a hard time breathing and that's why they had it done, or
If
if,
the Persian woman, it's always medically necessary,
oh,
but 90% is actually cosmetic because Persian women are born with no, for some reason they strive this European nose, this shallow, the pointy nose. But God gave us a potato instead of a nose. So, and that, but that for that reason, the plastic surgeons in Iran are very good. Talk to a Persian woman; they give you a lot of history about that.
I want to learn the ancient history. I don't want to learn the 20 years history. I'm curious about why they started doing rhinoplasty. Like, who was the first one? Was she really, I hate my nose so much. I don't care if I die. I don't need the anesthesia. Just open up my face and shave some off. Or was she having a hard time breathing and just had good outcome?
Let's find out in the next episode of Essence of History, History of Rhinoplasty.
Well, thank you guys for watching this Flash episode. I'm Amanda Armagast.
And I'm Dr. Abbasi for Essence.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.